You just got that brand new f1.0 or f1.2 really fast lens. You're looking forward to seeing how much bokeh or background blur that lens can give you. So you start creating some portraits of people and you notice that the eyes are out of focus in like 95% of your pictures. What is going on? How can you fix that? It's not the lens, it's your technique. And I hate to be blunt and say it this way, but you should not be shooting at these wide open apertures unless you have mastered focus and are absolutely certain of your technique. When you photograph at f1.0, f1.2, your depths of field, or what appears to be sharp, are razor thin. All right, we're talking millimeters here. Just to look at this example here, I'm using an 85 millimeter f1.2 lens on a full frame camera, and I'm doing some really tight headshots. Okay, I'm about 4.5 feet or a meter and a half away from my subject. And if we look at the depths of field tables, and we're going to go to photo pills, you can check out photo pills. They have a lot of great tools like this online. We can see that at that distance, if the eye is 1.5 meters away, and that is what we're focused on, our depth of field is about 2 centimeters. What appears to be sharp is going to be from 1.49 meters to 1.51 meters. That is less than an inch of depth of field. It's about 3/4 of an inch for us stubborn Americans, but it's about 2 centimeters. And that is not a lot of room for error. No matter what focus mode you're in, whether you are doing autofocus with a very small single point and you're trying to focus on the pupil, or you're using face and eye detection, where the camera is just looking for the shape of the eye to track that focus point and it's going to focus on whatever is in that box, which could be eyelashes. Or if, worse, you're using manual focus and either you and or the person you're photographing are moving around, you're just not going to be able to focus fast enough to ensure that that eye falls into that very small 2 centimeter width for your depth of field. Because what happens a lot of the time is that focus point might grab an eyelash. And some people have really long eyelashes. If that eyelash is 1 centimeter long, and that's what the focus point grabs onto, then the pupil 1 centimeter beyond that is going to be at that boundary of where people are going to start noticing that that pupil, that eye, is not sharp. And that photo is going to be unusable because if none of the eyes are in focus, then what good is it? That's assuming that you or your camera accidentally grab an eyelash. Well, let's look at the best case scenario for photographing at f1 in this situation with an 85 millimeter lens. And let's say that you or your camera actually does grab a lock onto that pupil. Well, now you have 1 centimeter in front of that and 1 centimeter behind that as like your error margin. And if your subject moves a half of a centimeter away from you and you move a half of a centimeter back between the time that you command that autofocus lock to when you finish pressing the shutter button and that image is recorded, if that movement totals to a centimeter, increasing that distance, then the eye is still going to be out of focus. Both you and your subject have to be statues in order to get a sharp eye between the time you focus and create that picture. It's going to be magnified even more if that focus point grabs onto that eyelash and then either you and or the person you're photographing move apart from one another right as you press the shutter button, then that eye is going to appear even more out of focus. I would encourage you to stop down a few stops because what we're trying to accomplish by shooting at these open apertures is to isolate our subject from the background, to blur the background. And you don't need to be at the widest possible aperture in order to do that. Let's compare these two images here. This is f1.2 and f2.0. And you can see that you can barely make out a difference. I myself can't make out a difference in how much the background is blurred between 1.2 and 2.0. They both look the same to me. So that background is taken care of at both f1.2 and f2. The background is equally blurry in both of those images. However, how that benefits us with regards to the person that we're photographing is now that depth of field has doubled. Our margin of error, our room for any kind of slop at all with where we focus or how we or the person we're photographing moves, that room has now doubled. Now, if we're photographing on that eye at a distance of 1.5 meters at f2.0, our depth of field goes from 1.48 to 1.52, or about 1.5 inches. That is still a minuscule depth of field. The nose and the ears are still going to be blurry if you are focused on the eye, but that buys you a lot more room to make sure that the eye is in focus, because that is what is the most important. That last table that I showed you, that's kind of an extreme scenario using an 85mm lens really close to the subject for a headshot. What happens if we back away with that same lens to a distance of about 3 meters? We double our distance to the subject, so now we're getting like a half-length portrait. That's 8 centimeters depth of field, which is fairly large compared to that 2 centimeter depth of field that we were just looking at. But still, there could be some things that go on there where you or the subject move a few centimeters and now you're out of focus. So again, stopping down to f2.0, your depth of field increases to 14 centimeters or about 5.5 inches. Or you could be using a 50mm lens at that 1.5 meter distance, so a little bit wider field of view. Your depth of field is going to be a little larger. However, if we go to the tables, we can see that even at 50mm, if we're at f1.0, our depth of field is only 6 centimeters or about 2.5 inches. Stopping down to f2.0, now that increases to 10 centimeters or about 4 inches. And that gives us, like I said, more room for error and a much bigger chance of ensuring that that eye is in focus if we have any problems with our autofocus or if we or our subject moves just a little bit. It's not a bokeh contest, okay? The blurriest background that you can get is all for nothing if you cannot get your subject's eyes sharp and in focus. Those photos are trash. So give yourself the best possible chance of success. Stop down to f2, f2.8, get that larger depth of field, which is still measured in centimeters, and make sure you get those eyes in focus while still blurring the background. There is a lot that goes into depth of field. It's a lot more than aperture. It's the focal length of your lens, how close you are to your subject. That plays a big part in how large your depth of field is. You can get an incredibly smooth, blurry background, even at apertures of f4, if you're close enough to your subject or you're using a long enough lens. Conversely, you may not be able to get your background sharp at all, even at apertures like f16 or f22, if you are too close to your subject. So if you do want to learn more about this, I have an advanced depth of field course. It's $12. Like, it goes into all of these different considerations: focal length, focus distance, aperture, and how they all combine to affect depth of field and what depth of field is defined as. But if you just take one thing away from this video, stop shooting at f1.0 for now. Stop down to f2, f2.8. Once you get really good at your focus technique and you make sure everything is still, then you can start taking advantage of those even wider apertures like f1.0. But no matter what you do, whether it's 1.0 or 2 or 2.8, you're still going to be able to blur your background and isolate your subject, which is ultimately what we want while getting our subject's eyes in focus. If you have any other questions or comments, please let me know here. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for more great tips like this every week, and I'll see you in the next video.